Coming up on Network Africa. Plane departs for Singapore as disagreement ensues between the Mugabe family and Zimbabwean government over where the veteran leader should be buried. At least 29 people killed in a militant attack in Burkina Faso. Plus 18 members of Sudan's first cabinet since the overthrow of President Omar Al-Bashir in April is being sworn in. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin today with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
Hours after Robert Mugabe's passing, Zimbabwe declared him a national hero. President Emerson Mnangagwa said the country would be in national mourning until the former leader was buried.
As we await the arrival of the remains of our dear departed icon, we pray that the good Lord grant him mercies, putting his dear soul to eternal rest. We as Zimbabweans declare days of mourning for our leader until he is buried.
Mugabe was one of the most polarizing figures on this continent's history, a giant of African liberation whose rule finally ended when he was overthrown by his own army. He died in Singapore, where he had long received medical treatment. His body is expected back on Wednesday. On Saturday, last office manager for Sudan's Omar Al-Bashir testified in court, saying the toppled leader was the only person with a key to a room at the presidential palace holding millions of euros. Speaking at Bashir's trial on charges of possessing illicit foreign currency and corruption, Bashir said the former president gave him more than 10 million euros in cash in his final month of rule for delivery to different parties. Abdelmonem Mohamed, an accountant at the International University of Africa, a private institution with links to Islamists, also testified in Bashir's defense. He said the university's director and deputy director received 4 million euros in cash from Mr. Bashir. Bashir sat in a metal cage in the courtroom wearing traditional white robes and turban. Though he did not speak at the hearing, he denied the charges when formally indicted a week ago. On Sunday, hundreds of thousands of people gathered to hear Pope Francis condemn a clan culture of privilege and corruption in Madagascar as he celebrated Mass. The cleric spoke in a homily at the Mass on a sprawling field on the outskirts of the capital for the gathered crowds of people, many of whom had spent the night outdoors in unseasonably cool weather. The Vatican said local organizers had estimated the crowd at around 1 million people. As he has since the start of his three-country sub-Saharan trip, Pope Francis spoke out about the gap in inequality in Africa. He has already stopped in Mozambique and will visit Mauritius on Monday.
To our main stories now, it seems like there is controversy over the burial plans for Zimbabwe's veteran leader, Robert Mugabe. The remains of the former president are due to return on Wednesday, and the government has confirmed that his funeral will take place this coming weekend. But there seems to be some disagreement between the family and the government over where the man who led Zimbabwe for 37 years should be laid to rest. Some of his relatives want him to be buried in his rural homestead in the village of Kutama, 80 kilometers west of the capital, Harare. However, the government want him to be buried where most of Zimbabwe's national heroes are buried, at the Heroes Acre Shrine just outside the capital. A plane is now left for Singapore carrying government officials and relatives to bring home the body of Robert Mugabe. Let's get more on this story from a Zimbabwean journalist in Harare, Nigel Yamatumbu. Thank you for joining us on the program. So tell us more about the arrangements for Robert Mugabe, especially with the clash between the government and the family about where he would be laid to rest eventually.
Well, the official position at the moment is that former President Robert Mugabe's body will arrive in the country on Wednesday, when it will be ferried to his rural home in Zimba, west of the capital city, Harare, where the traditional leaders and other members of his family and indeed supporters will be gathered. We expect to have the official state function according to government, on the Saturday, which will be held at the Giant National Sports Stadium in Harare, where we will be expecting various former heads of state and government and sitting heads of state to also attend. And it's a big event that has been planned there before his body is taken um, to its final resting place at the National Heroes Acre on Sunday. So that is so far the indicative program that has been communicated by the family and by the state. We also understand the president has chartered a plane from Harare to Singapore with members of Mugabe's family and senior government officials, headed by Vice President Kembo Mohadi, to go and ensure that the body is repatriated in the most amicable of manner.
Yeah, we know that his body is expected to arrive on Wednesday. Nigel, how is the country preparing to receive him? Are there any plans?
Well, I'm sure a good number of Zimbabweans will converge at the Robert Mugabe International Airport in Harare to receive the body of the former president. The head of state himself, President Mnangagwa, will lead the government delegation in receiving the body and in receiving the former first family. Um, as well as to lead the proceedings at our international airport. I think it will be highly overly subscribed, as scores of Zimbabweans have already been converging at his rural home. Zimba, where all the funeral proceedings have been taking place thus far, and as well as at the Blue Roof where he was residing. So thousands are expected to converge the Robert Mugabe International Airport, and there will be a long convoy stretching for hundreds of kilometers in celebration of his life.
Nigel, heads of state we know are
Well,
also being invited to a public ceremony. Who are we expecting to attend this?
Well, so far, most sitting heads of states and former heads of state have only um, conferred their condolence messages to President Mnangagwa and to the Mugabe's family and the country at large, without a real indication of who would actually be coming to Zimbabwe for the funeral service. Suffice to say, one would expect former presidents of Zambia, for example, Kenneth Kaunda, to be coming to Zimbabwe as someone that worked with former President Mugabe in the frontline states. You'd expect most SADC countries to be represented at head of state level. Expect also even former presidents of South Africa and so on to surely be making their way to Harare for his funeral. Internationally, perhaps you would get some leaders from, generally the from the East. I'm sure Russia, China, President Robert Mugabe's all-weathers friends from the East through his Look East policy will most likely be represented at a very high level, if not the highest level. So that is going to be seen. I think during the course of the week, we'll have a clearer picture on who has actually confirmed that they will be attending the official funeral service.
All right, Nigel, a lot to keep our eyes on this week. Thanks once again for joining us on the program. To other stories now. President Buhari has offered an assurance that the federal government is prepared to collaborate with the South African government to find a lasting solution to the involvement of few Nigerians in criminal activities. This is one of the key issues arising as he received the report of his special envoy to South Africa, Ambassador Hamed Rufai, who has returned from the assignment to address violent attacks against Nigerians. A statement from the President's Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina, says the President has also given instructions for the immediate voluntary evacuation of all Nigerians who are willing to return home. President Buhari further instructed the Foreign Affairs Minister to continue to engage with appropriate authorities on the concrete measures the South African government is expected to take. In the wake of the xenophobic attacks by South Africans against foreigners, including Nigerians, the President had sent Ambassador Rufai to convey a special message to his South African counterpart, President Cyril Ramaphosa. The issues raised in President Buhari's message included his deep concern about violence against Nigerians and their property and business interests in South Africa. He also expressed worries that the recurring issue of xenophobia could negatively affect the image and standing of South Africa as one of the leading countries on the continent. The President also stressed the need for the South African government to take visible measures to stop violence against citizens of brotherly African nations. Now, a Nigerian entrepreneur, Basil Onoigbo, is one of the victims of the latest spate of xenophobic attacks in South Africa. The 43-year-old has been in South Africa since 2005 and has now been left with no way to support his family.
43-year-old Nigerian entrepreneur Basil Onoigbo is one of the foreign nationals who saw his once thriving business reduced to ashes after rioters looted shops, burned tires and blocked road junctions last week in South Africa's commercial capital, Johannesburg. Onoigbo founded the Rabba Rabba Auto Space in Malvern, Johannesburg, after years of working odd jobs to support his family.
We didn't come to the shop on Sunday because I was scared. On Sunday, I never come to the shop because I was very scared. You see, even my fellow colleagues, they never come to the shop. Then on Monday, we come here. We see that all is damaged. They burned the shop on Sunday. Then in the afternoon again, on Sunday, they went upstairs again and put it on. Put another fire again. To see how heartless somebody is. You burn this place, it's not enough for you. You still go back again. In the following day evening, burn the place again, put more fire. You understand? Show me the love. Tell me, how does love goes in there? There's no brotherly love there. We are all one Africa. We are all the same. We are the same blood. We are not. I'm not even maybe you can say that maybe I'm a white man or this. No, we are the same blood of Africa. You see?
Police were unable to say what had triggered the violence, although unemployment at close to 30%, widespread poverty and income disparities have all been blamed for recent disturbances and attacks on immigrants. Last week, hundreds of protesters in the administrative capital, Pretoria, set fire to buildings, looted mostly foreign-owned businesses and clashed with police. South African government officials have up to now largely blamed the attack on criminals, but the foreign minister acknowledged some of it was being driven by Afrophobia, resentment of other Africans living and working there. As Onoigbo tries to piece his life together, he wonders what happened to a nation that once received so much support during the apartheid era. Onoigbo remembers when his father contributed to what was known as the Southern Africa Relief Fund, a program providing direct financial aid to the now ruling African National Congress.
Back home, going to school. My father paid for school, paid for South African apartheid for me. He paid for me. We paid it in the school. We paid it in the school because I can still remember during the time of regime of President President Babangida, Ibrahim Babangida, he was the president then. We paid it in the school. My father paid it. They say, yeah, our brothers in South Africa, they are crying, they are suffering, that we have to pay this money. So every primary school, every secondary school paid that money. Ask anybody, I paid that money.
The xenophobic attacks have claimed at least 10 lives, 2 of which were immigrants, as well as businesses owned by foreign nationals. Over 400 people have been arrested in connection to the violence.
Still to come on the program. Pope Francis arrives in Mauritius, the final stop of his 3-nation tour of Southern Africa. That's in a moment. Please stay with us.